5 or so minutes. So I wanted to thank you all for coming today. This is sort of a joint meeting between the Assembly Committee on Homelessness and the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness and their data component. And so the purpose of this meeting is to just review the current data sets we have and determine, as I said at the last meeting, a pathway for us to eventually develop an open data that's portal, that's open to the public on some of these different data points. So I want us to really hone in on developing that pathway, and it might be premature to set a deadline, but that would be something I'd like to see, is by this date we have a portal that is open to the public on all of these different data points. Because as, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but as they can probably attest, we get a lot of questions about a lot of these different issues, and being able to have that access, I think, is important. So with that, I'll turn it over to Nancy.
Thank you. So the two entities that we're convening, that chair is convening, are the Homeless Coalition, which has a data subcommittee that's been working for quite some time on depicting the data that's surrounding the federal HUD grants. The community is required to report a certain data set for all of the HUD-funded programs that come in, and that data goes into the Homeless Management Information System, HMIS, which as a community we're very interested in implementing a little more broadly than just the HUD-funded programs, so that it can be a tool that is useful, as Felix suggested, for a broader data repository or broader use. And there are other communities across the country that we've seen at conferences that really have shown a pretty robust implementation of HMIS. However, for Anchorage and for Alaska, we share the same data system with what's called the balance of state. All the other communities outside of Anchorage share the data system. It was formerly administered by the municipality and has just switched out to a contractor a little more than a year ago, right?
2015.
2015, 2 years ago. And that group, Institute for Community Alliances, has a particular role in the state as the lead agency on administering that data system. And so Zach is here from ICAs, the way that we refer to them. And that implementation has it's been a really big lift, and ICA has done an excellent job in training partners and getting data in, but if you've ever worked on a data system, you're pretty well aware that the quality of the data going in really does limits, or it allows for a more robust use of that data system. So, what goes in is the quality of what can come out. So the agencies really are just learning this data system. There's more users than we've ever had on the system. They're better trained on how to enter data, but there's a pretty big learning curve. And in fact, there are some providers, major providers for Anchorage, who have not been in the data system. And Zach and I have an exciting update for the coalition members that yesterday we met with the rescue mission, and they're ready to put their data into our system, which has been a big, major goal. And it was shockingly easy. I don't know. I don't know if we'll hear back later that they, no, we reconsidered or something, but it was shockingly easy. I asked, would you do it? And they said yes. Now we're going to have to help them, because they are not funded at all by any grants or any federal programs, and so they're going to need some training and support. But their director has been attending our coordinated entry meetings and has become convinced that that's the only way forward to help the people that they're serving. So that's 100 people being served in that location that will now be represented in our data system. So thanks for your help on that, Zach.
Thank you.
So having said that, I think it is worth going through. You have a detailed detailed Excel spreadsheet that has the data points that have been proposed. Some of them, and what I think is useful for us to do is to start walking through. I actually summarized this on a PowerPoint that I'll pull up. Some of the data points are ready to go, and we can start pulling from what's already in the data dashboard that's available for the grantees. We can start pulling that into a community data dashboard and then pair it with some other data points that are being collected by the municipality and possibly other areas. So why don't I pull up that PowerPoint real quick? Background point while we're talking here, while this is coming up.
And actually, Nancy, sorry, I should have done this, but my fault. Yeah, we should do it just for the record. So if we can start with Suzanne, and then we'll go around the table and do introductions for the record.
Suzanne LeGrand.
Forrest Dunbar.
Leonard Trenton.
Amber Jackson.
Felix Rivera.
Nancy Burke.
Zach Burgess.
Leslie Need.
Christopher Constant. Sharon Shamar. Kasia Hodge.
Marcy Shear.
Thank you. And we have Lisa Aquino on the phone.
And I think there were a few others on the phone.
Maureen Hackelon.
Morning.
Melissa Parrish, IPA.
Morning. Okay. Is that everyone?
Thank you.
So, in the spirit of this being a combined committee, I think most of the assembly members are aware that the community has organizations that have been combining efforts and working on a plan to end homelessness in England. The mayor's office is supporting a subset of that plan, focusing in on adults who are homeless and those who are experiencing long-term homelessness. There are other partners who are focused on different parts of that overarching plan and have expertise in different areas. For instance, we have mental health providers, we have the family providers who've worked on the overflow shelter for families. There's a lot of moving parts in this system, but one of the pieces that we're working with Lisa Aquino, who you heard introduce herself as the chair of the coalition right now, is implementing a plan that is really outcome focused and that pulls all of those deeper planning components that have been worked on for the 13 years that I've been in this work and a little bit longer. All of the planning data and the technical information that program people need to make the changes that are pulled up into an outcome-based summary. All of those pieces are still being worked and understood, but we're trying to communicate out one collective impact based plan for the community. And collective impact is a way of articulating complex systems change into outcomes that I would use the example that my neighbor can understand what we're doing. And so this concept of theory of change, or how we're organizing the work, is what we've been talking about with the committee, and the coalition's been working through their processes, and is one, I think, idea that we've started to think about as we communicate that joint plan to Anchorage. That may be a place that we can attach this data dashboard, because I can see that the municipality is probably going to want to have links to data that is owned and administered by the municipality. And in fact, it gets pretty complicated when you talk about placing data in other locations that you can't keep firewalls around, and there's lots of issues around where data actually gets stored. But communicating that data in one community dashboard may be a concept that we want to pursue under this combined committee structure, so that we're each able to display our data, but it gives the community one place to go. And so that's a concept that I've started to talk with the coalition partners about. I'll start to talk with United Way about it, and I think we'll get back to the committees, both committees, with some suggestions around that in the coming months. So we're breaking our work into 3 phases: finding people, reducing the time that they're homeless by identifying housing in the community, and then looking at how long people are stable in housing. Those are in a very simplified way the 3 phases of work that we want to look into. The Excel spreadsheet that you have is all of the data points that we've brainstormed, not all of them that we may want to know around those 3 areas, but that's sort of the world of possibilities. And then if we start to look at what the actual data points are that are existing around these 3 phases that we can pull into that community dashboard pretty quickly, we would look at the most data that we have is around this area of finding people. And that's because the HUD grantees are engaged in that coordinated entry process led by the Homeless Coalition, and it's really focused everyone's energy on finding where people are and getting resources to them. So the rate of persons in the homeless persons in the community would be the overarching, or what we would call the headline indicator, and that would move based on some of the data points listed below. We might use the point in time, which we've talked quite a bit about. There's a lot of margin of error in that point in time count. We're using an outreach count. We sort of unofficially call it a point in time summer count. That's actually really not the case. It's just an outreach count that we're organizing as a community. We can look at the trend of new homeless persons in the community, which is tracked on the dashboard that the grantees have available for us. We can look at shelter counts, which is also available to us. The Sleep Off Center, I think, factors into how we're doing with our homeless population in a community, and then the camp notification process and the HART forms. Each of these data points are relatively ready to go, and we can pull them up into the beginning of that community-wide dashboard for monitoring by both the Assembly and our Homeless Coalition and other partners. I'm going to stop and take a breather. Is there information, would you like to go through the grantee dashboard around what's available? And this drawing is probably too small for you to read the writing, but basically what this shows is that we have 3 different systems at play in the community. This inner core is the HUD grantees. It's what the coordinated entry is really focused on right now. And the HMIS data system is the underpinning for these are the grantees, these are the HUD funds. But one of the things that is important for the community is that this middle ring is the municipality, and it's the place where if we're not able to capture everybody by these grantees, we start to see people in the community. So we see them with the muni, public safety, fire, police, EMS responses. We see them outside of shelter. We see them in neighborhoods. If we can't engage people, we start to have a need to look at our social service configuration and our housing stock. How can we get those people from those locations to housing? And then there's this other area which has a surprisingly large influence on how the 2 inner circles work, because HUD sometimes has requirements that make us implement programs in ways that may not be the best way for the community, but it's a federal requirement. And so we have that state and federal sphere of influence, I guess you would say. So as we think about the data points, we can draw from each level of these data areas, and we can pull them up into our data dashboard and monitor them, which will also help us with advocacy at the state level and advocacy at the federal level. Maybe just for fun and for a reminder, we can ask Zach if he would walk us through the dashboard that is available for that middle group for the HUD grantees, the HMIS.
Sure.
I can pull that up here.
Sounds good. You want to drive or me to? Okay. I think it's worth noting that if AHFC has funds for projects that are listed here, like rapid rehousing, emergency shelter, AHFC also requires their grantees to record data in the system as well. There is some state.
Some state overlap in that.
Yeah. Let's see here.
So when you say data, Zach, for HFC, are you talking like BHAP and voucher and all of that is going to be in this database?
BHAP is collected in the database. When you say voucher, here, I'll just oh, there we go. BHAP, when you say voucher, you mean AHFC. If it's covered under the BHAP program, so they do some emergency placements, then it will be captured. But not everything that AHFC does in the community is captured. It's just under their BHAP program. Does that make sense?
And for those, the BHAP is the Basic Homeless Assistance Program that's through Alaska Housing Finance Corporation in their homeless grant area.
Cool. Okay, so basic info, we got total clients that were served in the quarter, and this kind of mimics what HUD requests from the grantees and breaks it down a little further. So this is an unduplicated number, 3,115 people were served by projects that were entering into the system at this time for projects that are captured here. And HUD actually asks for the whole year, so we report a number for the whole year for each continuum. But right here we are broken down a quarter. And you can see that the percentage has gone down from one quarter to the next. New clients, so these are clients that haven't touched the system, or that have, let me make sure I explain this correctly. Either they've never been in the system before, like they've never experienced homelessness before, or it's been at least 2 years since they've experienced homelessness. So they've had a break of 2 years. And that is, they could have gone into a doubled up situation, and that wouldn't be reflected here because we don't reflect, it's very difficult to capture doubled up information on clients. So that particular instance of homelessness is not very easy to capture. So this just looks at if they touch a project that enters data into the system. And then the number of shelters, people who are sheltered. And we are looking at Anchorage, I think.
So Zach, that performance measure that shows January through March, 1,200 new clients, and then April through June, that's additional 1,000?
Correct. And so people will become, will go into homelessness for a variety of reasons. And so oftentimes they self-resolve. So a lot of people aren't captured on the by name list because they self-resolve so quickly. So a lot of these people probably entered homelessness, but then self-resolved. But that's kind of what you have to look at is how many are self-resolving, how many are going into a doubled up situation, how many people are repeating, quarter to quarter. So that's kind of where we need to do some more research.
Zach, for those numbers, particularly for the new clients, are the people self-reporting that they have not experienced homelessness before or have not for 2 years? Or is it just that their name hasn't been in the database before or for 2 years?
It would be the latter.
Okay.
Hasn't been in the database. That would be interesting to see, though.
Well, maybe different numbers.
Yeah. This middle part, just performance measures. This is another kind of thing that HUD looks at, like how long are the stays in emergency shelter. If a permanent supportive housing program, like if you start a new permanent supportive housing program is working, you're going to see that length of time in emergency shelter go down. It's one of the metrics that you can use to figure that out. Length of time. Needs to refresh. It's been too long. All right, length of time in permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing. This is the days between that they're accepted into the program and that they move in. So about 92 days is what we've kind of stayed at. for a while now. And then time in transitional housing. And transitional housing is usually up to 2 years, is about how long people can stay in there. I find this to be the most interesting part, just because you can see, based on the quarter and based on the services provided here, I'll scribble up, all the client details. And so when we presented this to we work in a couple different states, well, 9 different states, people were shocked that American Indian and Alaskan Native was the highest number, one of the highest demographic for rates that we had. You can also see based on emergency shelter, you can see information. So here's your client count by age, gender, and so this covers all emergency shelters in Anchorage, not just individuals, so family emergency shelters and youth emergency shelters. And then this is very interesting, cause of homelessness. And we've got the breakdown. They're asked to give, every client is asked to give a one reason, to boil it down to one reason, which is very hard to ask someone in a situation of homelessness to boil down to one reason why are you experiencing homelessness. But the primary reason that people give us is employment and income. And oftentimes people will come to me and say, oh, I thought substance abuse, and I thought mental health was the biggest reason. And so I'll pull the dashboard and be like, okay, well, under health and safety is substance abuse. And then illness, injury, and treatment. So health and safety would be the substance abuse column, and the data this doesn't show. Yeah.
Yeah, but it seems like that's an assumption in some ways, because my experience with substance abuse and addiction is that one of the first areas of instability that begins to occur is with your employment. And so it's hard to correlate or not correlate the factor, right? Because why are they having employment and income problems? Is it because then of their addiction or their other unmedicated or untreated mental health or other issues?
Right.
So I think it's unfair to make an assumption that, well, it isn't substance abuse, right? That just isn't supported in your data here. That's just, it's the top level problem is their employment and income. That's fair to say, but it wouldn't be fair to say addiction or other issues aren't the primary determinant of that problem.
Right. Okay. I totally agree with you. And so I probably misspoke. I think that, I understand. So, and again, this is self-report.
Yep.
So, there's that. Shelter utilization. So this is the number of beds, and number of beds available for all emergency shelters, and then the utilization rates, and you can see it goes up as the months get colder. And then this is one. I think this statistic here, return to homelessness from supportive housing, permanent supportive housing. I think that's one that we're going to be looking at or that you were hoping to have on the dashboard. Yeah. Just ideally, people aren't going back into emergency shelter if we've given them an intervention that should put them in permanent housing. So that's what that's tracking. Cool. Any questions?
So that's 4% is what that's showing, roughly?
Yeah.
4 to 5% of return homelessness. That's actually pretty good.
The standard dashboard at that website is available. I think if it's not linked to the coalition website, it will be soon. And so this, you can monitor this anytime. This is always available. And great.
Does this get updated quarterly, or when does that happen?
Quarterly.
Okay. Great.
Yeah.
I have a question. Sure. So the data point in the lower right, left-hand corner, the bar chart, I think would it be possible to, maybe not on this, but at some later point, share data with the data groups on sort of, I keep using the term recidivism. I'm a criminal justice person. It's not, and they're not committing crimes if they become homeless again, but that's, and I don't know what the term is in the homeless literature, refer to, what people.
Yeah, just returns to homelessness.
Returns to homeless. Okay, that's very descriptive.
Yeah.
It's sort of like extending the time period from 100 days to maybe a year or even 2 years. So I mean, is there a point where you would say if someone's housed, they're stably housed and they're likely to be housed stably for the rest of their lives, or is there a point where they can maybe keep it together for a few months and then, because we were talking about this in the continuum of care group about how do you measure program effectiveness? And one really good measure would be, so if they're saying their clients are out of the program, you remember this conversation, right? If their clients are out of the program and they're on their own now, but then we see a bunch of them coming back into homelessness within a few months, that's an indicator that the program really may not be doing such a good job, and it's just sort of pushing people out to generate numbers that show they're meeting their program goals.
And that is actually one of HUD's performance measures that they require continuum. So like our Anchorage is a continuum to report on. And so actually we can go 2 years out. We have that data on the website, just not on this dashboard.
I see, okay.
Yeah.
Well, and I would add then that the whole presentation started with the idea that people are either never experienced homelessness or it's been 2 years, right? And so that 2-year mark is a pretty clearly accepted data point.
Okay.
That's like, that would be considered a fresh experience of homelessness. At least that's what I gather from this presentation.
Yeah.
So yeah, we can provide that.
I think the category of that last part of our discussion falls under the third phase of what we're thinking about this stability. So how long are they remaining stable after housing? And that really gets down to the question of, do we have the right service configuration that's flexible and available to them to get out in the community and help people stay housed and to prevent that next episode of homelessness if they start having substance abuse issues or mental health issues. I call that coordinated staying. We haven't quite made it past coordinated entry yet, but that'll be some of the work that'll be coming up in the next year. And that return to homelessness is why I want to start looking at that, because that tells us how well our service system is able to remain with the people over time. So that's that. Okay, so any other comments or questions about this part? So what we're proposing is that we just start with these numbers, and I think we'll leave it to the data folks to tell us the amount of time with the reporting timelines. Some of them are quarterly. Like I was thinking about the camp notification. I think we almost have to do that as a season and not as a month-to-month kind of thing, because our police get pulled into other police duties. It's not like there's somebody who's dedicated every day going out and doing those notifications, so the rate would be inconsistent. But over the season, which would be April to September 30, we can look at how many folks and that kind of thing. So the timeline for reporting we might lead to folks who are collecting data, but using these, I think we can take a stab at starting to put that dashboard together. Questions or comments? Okay, so that gets us into the next one, where we want to start looking at the resources available we find people but to get them to housing, we need to know where our housing stock is, where the resources for rental assistance are, and how that's distributed across the community. And so I would like to introduce Amber, and she is from our GIS unit. What's the name of your unit?
GDIC, Geographic Data and Information Center.
And so we've been working with that group on depicting the places where people can go for resources. And I think there's 2 questions here and 2 ways of looking at the data. The first is, where is the housing, so that we can keep our providers and keep those resources focused for them. When we find homeless people, we want to be able to get to that housing as quickly. And as you saw, some of our timelines for getting to housing are around 3 months right now. We'd like to see that come down. We'd like to see that faster and more people get to housing. So taking a look at where the units are, where do people go in the community. For data privacy reasons, we're not able to say the homeless people move to X address. We don't track that in the HMIS system. There's no place where we actually track what address a person who's moving from homelessness went to. However, we can track where are the multifamily units across town and in what percentage are they located in each of the areas that we want to examine. And I think you broke it into assembly districts in some of the, oh, no, you did. You broke it into assembly district.
Yeah.
So there's two data pieces. There's the housing stock, which is you, and then there are where the permanent supported housing, where the subsidy dollars are going into the community. And so we'll have two. Let's take a look at the map first, and then we'll take a look at the report that Zach put together for us.
So I have a couple different maps that I've been working on just to get data out there, and Nancy's gonna then be able to tie this together more seamlessly. Right now, this map shows anything in orange is HUD housing pulled off of the State Alaska HUD website where they have apartments. The teal dots are emergency services as far as shelters and soup kitchens, and then Nancy also asked me to add the libraries. So this is kind of a snapshot of where things are now. Then I pulled some census block data, and I did it by block because it gave like a better picture. I tried it by zip code and some other stuff that wasn't as great. This shows rented versus occupied housing in the municipality as a percent. So the red shows high rental percentages versus blue being mostly owner occupied. From there, I pulled rates of unemployment. There's also median household income and percentage below the poverty line. Layering these on top of each other, there's the clip of the census block area. This is using the 2015 census information from the fact finder. These are the areas that show high risk in all of those. So a picture of, according to the census data, where populations are at most at risk. Then we also have this map which shows all of the multifamily parcels in the municipality now. So it's still in its early phases, but this is all the different layers of data, at least at this point, that we're looking at. And it'll be interesting tying this map back to these areas that are, through a combination of things, shown to be at risk.
I have a couple questions. Can you back up to the first screen you showed?
This one.
Yeah. So you said that the HUD housing or the orange,
Yeah.
that can't be all of it, right? So
That's just one. That's the start. So then, and we didn't have Zach's report for it yet,
Okay.
so we'll be able to combine these two.
Wait, though, all of it, I think you mean by not all of the HUD housing, not all
Right,
of the
it's
homeless
not-
supported units, it's,
I'm just thinking of, I'm on the board for Neighborhoods, so I'm thinking of our properties that I believe have folks who are utilizing HUD vouchers or programming under HUD that are not reflected on those dots.
Right.
So I'm just wondering, like, if this is a self-report thing or a partial picture of what we're seeing in the
It
community.
might have been confusing to add just the HUD properties in. Those are the federal subsidized units. So there would be all the 811 projects that have been developed, and some of those are for other populations too. So we'll make sure that we detail it out when we combine these. But basically what we want to show is that we're working on a map depiction of where multifamily units are, what income brackets are within those multifamily units, and using those two measures, we can look at the places where people who are transitioning from homelessness, who aren't going to have higher incomes, are more likely to go. And that seems like a question that the Assembly would want to monitor, is where are the options for people? Are they all in one location? And so that the map that had the pink sections that Amber showed are the ones that have the combination of unemployment rates, the income per household rates, and then multifamily units in those locations. And so that feels like a management tool that the Assembly would want to be aware of and looking at. Then what we'll do is we'll add in the permanent supported housing sites that are that we know of by address, because that's where the subsidy dollars go. We would not include units that are just multifamily units that any person in the community could qualify for as ones that are inherently subsidized, because those vouchers go with people, and those people could be anywhere across the community. So anywhere where the voucher goes with the building, or there's capital dollars in that's a federal subsidy, will be also populating that map that has the HUD points on it. Does that make sense?
And the HUD points were just off of this PDF that's on
The
the
federal list.
Okay, so, and that, I mean, so it's probably not comprehensive for what.
And I just started digging into this
Yeah.
data on Monday, so this is still pretty
And so
rough.
that's such a
Wow,
challenge,
that's
just
great
from, like,
work.
sending me
Yeah.
like,
Days,
like,
thank you.
what?
Yeah.
This is so great. Did you have a question?
Well, I have a couple comments, actually. One way, I don't know if you're counting AHFC properties as in the HUD category, or that would be a separate colored dot on the map. But when I tried to figure this out a few years ago, I just went to the Muni's property assessment webpage and just searched for AHFC, and that bring up all the properties that were owned by AHFC. So I know there's like 2 on my street that are
Right.
Section 8 people living in them, and but not on your map. And I know you didn't do that search yet, but that's
So that would be public housing, which probably we can put that on, because I think the way to think about it is the unit is subsidized in public housing also. It's not the kind of subsidy that a person can move from that housing to another one across the community and take the voucher with them.
So you're not looking at housing that's eligible for use by someone who's carrying a voucher. You're looking at facilities that are specifically designated for housing people with vouchers, or have funds dedicated to them for that type of housing.
Correct.
Okay,
Because
so-
we can track buildings,
Right.
we can't track people. And so then, once we know where all the multifamily units are across the community, another sort of view that I want to take is how many of those landlords and units accept vouchers, because the true options for people to move throughout the community depends on how many of those landlords we have who will accept those vouchers. And so then we want to make sure that there's opportunity across the whole community for them.
So I have another comment. So you have the aggregate map, sort of like the concentrated disadvantage map that showed, and so Nancy, it sounds like from what you're talking that these are the neighborhoods that there is an expectation that people transitioning out of homelessness would end up living in.
I wouldn't say that.
You didn't say that?
I wouldn't say that.
Okay. Well, I may have misinterpreted, but
It's likely,
yeah.
based on income and units. Now, we don't know if landlords in those areas accept subsidies. They may not. They may just be regular poor people living there.
Yeah, I mean, just this kind of concerns me, because if we have an expectation, and you didn't say this, but I'm not saying you said this, but if there is a belief in general that these are neighborhoods where people coming out of homelessness are more likely to end up, and if we support that through policies like trying to find out which landlords in these places take Section 8, and if they don't, maybe encouraging them to, that just further concentrates disadvantage in the
You might have
city.
misunderstood what I said.
Yeah.
The whole, can you go to the whole multifamily map?
This is every multifamily.
That's the map we want to focus on. What percentage of landlords take Section 8?
Okay, great. I'm sorry. I did
That one
misunderstand.
is,
Yeah.
so it is not my expectation that people would move to the other area. It's that we would have options, and really a big number of the people who are homeless would be part of protected classes, and to represent good public policy, and also honor the Americans with Disabilities Act. We need to be focused on opportunity across the community.
Yes.
Would it be fair then to just make an assumption that without some kind of active intervention, just because of market forces, it's likely that people who are trying to transition out of homelessness end up in those zones?
I can't say that.
You don't think that, well, that's, I think, a fair question to contemplate then. If that's just the natural and how it's become how it is, that this intervention is, if it's done right, can actually help to ensure fair housing.
Right.
Go ahead, Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You are chairing this subcommittee meeting, right?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess, Nancy, could you go back to that, the shaded, red shaded? So if you zoom in on that, in my district, in the top right-hand corner there, right there, that little triangular neighborhood. So I think if that is where I think it is, what that is the trailer park. There's a large trailer park right in that area. And so I guess I'm also sort of struggling about what we're learning from this map. I mean, you know, without doing any kind of research, we would know that there's a lot of people experiencing homelessness or that are facing challenges in Fairview, for example, in that whole area which is red. On this map, you know, there are a lot of sort of concentrated areas of poverty all up and down Muldoon. It's interesting that only that particular trailer park versus the other trailer parks in that area ended up shaded red. So I guess I am sort of questioning, what are we learning from this map?
This map was just my initial take on layering stuff. I haven't had input from anyone else, so I can totally change how it is. I was just looking at different risk factors and trying to figure out, according to census data, where there could be higher risk.
Higher risk of people falling into homelessness? Is that what you're
Needing
saying?
just general services, whether they aren't even necessarily homeless, but they could need other assistance services in some way.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I'm curious why that area how that area ended up shaded red when some of the nearby trailer parks, which I believe have very similar demographics. There's a large Hmong community in that particular trailer park, for example.
So it could be also the shape of the actual census blocks.
Right.
So maybe the actual block is shaped differently, so that one concentrates mainly around the mobile home park versus others include a greater area, which is also why I didn't do it by zip code, is this was the smallest demographic area that I could find. So like, that area is tiny compared to this whole section down here, so it's not necessarily the most accurate, it's just the smallest.
Well, I think it's interesting because if you go back to that map, the original map you're talking about, so that in my district, that area is a trailer park. And I'm not sure how much kind of useful information we glean out about knowing that there's like challenges in that trailer park versus other trailer parks. But that section next to Russian Jack Park right there, if you zoom in on that's San Roberto, San Antonio. That actually is a really interesting area that's unique. It's not like the other areas around it. And the fact that your map captured that block speaks favorably of your map. That is an area that should be a unique concern in my district because there are very large apartment complexes in that district that really aren't anywhere else in that area. And so, I'm just trying to sort of trying to figure out what we're gleaning from this map. And again, the fact that it captured that neighborhood, I think, speaks favorably to it. Although it also didn't capture Riga, which is
Or Penland Park.
which is near there too. But I would say that neighborhood probably is, even compared to Riga, is uniquely challenged.
And it could also be the stats that I used to consider so it was gross household income below 45,000, a poverty level above 20%, and home ownership below 50%. Is the actual picture being shown here.
Which is, are condos home that's owned, right?
Yes.
So it's interesting. So Riga, that's all condos that are owned, although they are low-income condos mostly. And then that area is all renters. Those are apartment complexes. So that's just an interesting result.
So I think that what we'd like to do is get feedback from you about the utility or even this approach and continue refining this. And this is actually just an internal configuration of maps right now. It's not available on the open data yet. But if we can agree that there's some utility and monitoring and there's some policy goals that the Assembly wants to pursue, then we can certainly make this a useful tool.
It's very valuable.
Yeah, thank you, Ms. Burke. And actually, I have one comment. Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. So it would be interesting, I think, for this body to see an overlay of the very first map you, nope, the one prior to that. Yeah, that one. There's a lot of them. Thank you. And then this one, yes.
I can do that right now live.
Oh, well, there we go. That'd be great.
It
to
would
see
be
that.
especially great when it has the additional HFC and other units in it.
Yeah, when it's completed. Yeah. And then, that brings me to sort of the public policy aspect of this. Once this map gets refined, does this go to the question that Mr. Constant raised in the last Assembly Committee on Homelessness regarding future projects and where we should place them and where we should not?
So I think there's one other piece of data, which is this report that came from the HMIS system. We're also required as a community to do a housing inventory chart to take a look at where units that are permanent subsidized units. So the rest of the units will be in this document, and we will populate them on the map for the committee meeting next week. And then looking at the balance for this community of permanent supported units versus scattered site units. So this second report that you have documents that. Did everybody get a copy?
Yes, Mr.
Before we move on, I just wanted, you raised a very interesting observation, I think, and it's a subject of the map, but it's also something that we should be contemplating as we raise ourselves up the kind of hierarchy of questions regarding homelessness and security, housing security over time. And Boris, the line you drew there was on RICA they own, and on that other section they rent. And there is something to be said over the long term of us participating in projects that help people own, because that does provide a level of stability and security over time that we won't get in other ways. So I just want to, you hit on something really interesting there.
Well, yeah, Mr. Chairman, can I?
Yes.
So two things on that. One, I think that also raises a question about how we view mobile homes, right? And the mobile home parks, which are kind of the affordable housing we offer, at least in East Anchorage, lots of it. And it's kind of curious, do they own it, do they not own it? It's an interesting question. But just one other suggestion on this map. One of these maps, I would suggest that you leave JVR off of these maps when you're doing it, when you're shading these things, because there was one of the maps that showed JVR like all renting, for example. Right. So,
Yeah, of course.
you can't own on the military base. So it makes it look bad, but actually those guys are fine, by and large. We don't need to worry about JVR. So I think in general, when we're doing maps like this, let's just leave that off, because it kind of makes the whole map look different than it actually should.
Yeah, I can easily clip it to not show anything on JVR.
And I guess that's the military reservation too. That's
All of
JVR
it.
and military reservation, right?
Yeah.
That's all military land. It's not really relevant to what we're talking about.
Mr. Martin?
Yeah, I'll say that a piece of data that would be really interesting to see would be, and I think Nancy, you mentioned this before, that we can track where the buildings are but not where people go for privacy reasons. But one way to present the data would not be with points, but with like a chloroplet map.
Yeah, we have.
With that where voucher holders are living, because that could help address the question of, are they in fact scattered throughout the community, or are they concentrated in these sort of areas of concentrated disadvantage? And if we find the latter is true, then that's like, well, that gets to equity issues, and maybe there should be a concerted policy to disperse people more evenly throughout the community.
And the question, of course, is how does one gather that information without causing a threat to the individuals? And I trust that we can come up with a reasoned approach to that, even if we don't have access to it. We can find a way that protects, so we don't even ever see addresses. Nobody, HMS doesn't. But we still get a district or census tract or other kind of report that shows, as a snapshot, a point in time, these are where these elements are today, or where they have been over. If we did this every quarter for 2 years, we'd see a real snapshot of migratory patterns and movement of people and impact of our policies. We could actually measure the impact of our policies if we had such information.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. And before I get to you, I just want to make a quick comment for the purposes of time. If anyone else has any thoughts regarding this map and how they'd like to see it shape into the future, if you could email Nancy, that'd be great. And I'm sorry.
Leslie Mead, and just
Okay.
real quick, I'm interested in sort of the availability of the HMIS and similar databases to service providers. And the reason I ask that is because in our Resident Services Committee at NeighborWorks, we talk a lot about how to get people quickly placed at our properties and provide services. And I'm wondering, at the end, is it the hope that service providers will be accessing this kind of all at the same time in real time to more quickly meet housing needs for people who have already been identified and screened?
It's a yes and no. The service providers meet every Tuesday in this room.
Right, yeah.
As a matter of fact. And they talk about the prioritization list. There are ways that we can prioritize people for placements. And I think that there needs to be a companion meeting of the housing providers that can give us, like, I get the vacancy list of NeighborWorks, and I think all the time, I wonder, you know,
How this is being communicated, right,
how it's
yeah.
getting transmitted over to the people list people. So I think that's really like the next step that I've started to see as well. So,
And that's beyond what you're talking about here. That's
so
okay.
those housing providers wouldn't necessarily be on HMIS unless they receive some federal funds, and so
I see. Okay.
but there's a team that's connecting the two, and that team has been standing up the people side of the process, and so now I think they're ready to start working on standing up the housing side of the process. So Zach, could you walk us just quickly, like 2 or 3 minutes through what this report tells us? And then I think what we'll do is I'll work with Amber, and thank you for throwing these up here for us to kind of project that and to appreciate I think we'd like to put this together as just something for conversation for the committee meeting next week and bring it back to present. That's good.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So if we can take the last few minutes to talk about this report, which is the remainder of the entities receiving, well, probably not the complete total remainder, but the next big chunk of entities receiving the federal funds for permanent supportive housing for folks. And the scattered site.
Yeah, so it is, there's a few things in there. There's the ESG, there's, the federal funding. So on the second page, I'll just walk you through the second page first to start with, just to give you some background of what we're looking at. We just pulled the providers and the specific programs that are represented, the number of clients that they served in the specific time period, and we wanted to compare this year last year at the same time, and so we compared January 1st to the end of July from both years. And then we specified whether it was a scattered site or a single site, and then we specified the location by district.
By council, right?
Community council?
Yeah.
So the percentages of scattered site to single site, for a community, I'm starting to do some research about what other communities, what their percentages look like. 71 and 28% for 2016, and 72 and 27 for 2017. There's the next thing that we will do when we take a look at this is we will start mapping where those permanent supported sites are, and then that's an area where you can do analysis about if you have too many in one area, not enough in another. And then the scattered site is we've talked about different ways of trying to view how people are able to achieve housing across the community.
Could we pull that map back up quickly?
Thank you.
Thank you. And just zoom in on the downtown.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you very much. just like this. There we go. So, now, for the purposes of the mapping, just I want to point out, just basic math, of the 30%, 28% that are single site, that's 96.7% of them are located within the downtown district, the assembly district, spread across 3 community councils. But functionally speaking, you are actually talking about right here is one. Here's the emergency services kind of hub. Here's one of the units. Then here's one of the units. And then you have third and Cordova. Yeah, it's here. So here's one of the units. And then proposed, of course, is the set that's right over here. And so while it says Mountain View, which spans all the way over there, and it talks about downtown, we're actually really talking about a super tight geographic area. A super tight geographic that just conveniently has 4 borders running through it that divide it into community council boundaries. And so in some ways, the flow of people and the flow of this concentration isn't across Mountain View, downtown, and Fairview. It's in this little tiny bluff area kind of right above from the emergency services hub. It's tight. It's just like 8 blocks in any direction from there. And so I just want people to understand when we talk about it's 3 community councils, it's literally just one tiny, tight geographic area that all 96% of those units essentially of the 30% are at. So when we talk about, oh, it's in Mountain View, oh, it's in downtown, oh, that one's in Fairview, it's different than that. It's all in one tight, tiny little geographic area. So.
I think one of the things that will be a benefit of this map and making the emergency services what we want to track is the volume of services happening on any one location. So Brother Francis obviously in Beans would have a larger volume, larger impact, downtown Soup as well, but separating out the volume and the services that have an impact on the neighborhood versus housing where people are stabilized and in fact it's a different service. And so separating out those 2 things, they tend to get conflated in neighborhoods because it feels like everything is one. But in truth, housing is such a different impact on the neighborhood. Smaller numbers of people, more stabilized people. It's the large volume services that I think really need the analysis for concentration. And so that's something that this map will be able to help us achieve as well.
But also, I'm sorry. I'm just the congregate housing facilities, I think they may have an impact on the neighborhood, not as much as say a soup kitchen or Brother Francis would, but certainly more than scattered site and people living in different apartments.
Actually, our numbers show us that people are coming out of scattered sites in such higher percentages that may actually not be true. The stability of people in the permanent supportive housing is over 90% across 2 years. And our scattered site units, because our social services aren't configured well to support people out in the community, see a much higher turnover volume. So I think there's a lot of data to analyze on that once we have the numbers.
That's good. All answerable questions.
Ms. Hodge.
So one of the things that I've always found really concerning is just the lack of housing in general available in Anchorage. So I live in Mountain View, and 3 years ago we had a huge apartment complex go up in fire. And everyone was like, well, where are these people going to go because there isn't housing available in Anchorage? Because for the people that I know that have been homeless, they always try to self-resolve first before entering into services. It has a lot to do with pride. I'm just curious, are we looking at that at all? If someone was trying to just do it on their own, does our housing capacity even support that? Or do you have to, hey, you know what? If we run into people, like, I'm very involved with my tribe and we have a number of homeless tribal members, do I say, you know what? You need to stop trying to do it on your own because right now it's not realistic, enter into these services.
So there's an effort, there's a companion to my work in the mayor's office with looking at housing through Robin Ward. And there was a study that was done several years ago called Housing Anchorage that the McDowell Group conducted. And that study's being re-upped right now so that we can take a look at those, what is the vacancy, what is the cost, all of those factors. So that study will be updated shortly.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hodge. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, so back on the previous topic of the scattered and the congregate, I would concede, and I think if the numbers show that having folks together in a certain number is valuable because they create a community, they create a place that is shared, and we all do better in community. The experiment we haven't attempted in this town is to attempt any of these units outside of that area, right? Because the convenient answer has been, for any number of reasons or any number of years, this is the place to do it. And so we can't even know if this geographic location, because of all of the concurrent emergency services that are happening, is actually dragging down the results, that we could have even better results for the individuals and for the communities at large if we're providing the services in a way that's efficient for the providers, which is obviously at some scale, but at the same time in a place that isn't enraptured in this slow-rolling refugee crisis that's on the streets of north of our downtown. And so that's the piece that I'm hopeful we can move towards, is asking that question with actual resources of what happens if we actually do this in a place that isn't in a slow-rolling crisis.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Fair questions. I think that's time. So I want to thank you all for attending this meeting, and if you all can make it to the Assembly Committee on Homelessness, it is this next Wednesday, the 16th, a week from today, same time, 11 to 12:30. Thank you all.